another piece of thrown to the mix there with the shadows out of the periphery, and that's because our eyes are made up of rods and cones, and the rods from the sides, they're more grouped around the sides of cones and more towards the front. The rods are meant to take in more light, so we actually take in more light from the periphery. We actually see a touch into the infrared over there as well. And so that's why, we might see something out of the corner of our eye, we turn and look, and it seems like it's gone. It's probably not gone though.
With us today is author, researcher, and filmmaker Mike Ricksecker. Mike, it's been a long time since you were last on the show. How have you been?
Been pretty busy, doing really well. And thanks so much for having me back, Cristina. I always enjoy talking with you. We have some great conversations.
It is always a pleasure to speak with you. You open my mind to so many bizarre and interesting possibilities when it comes to this world. And I said, you know what? He's been insanely busy. I know he has some stuff that he wants to talk about. I want to hear it. Let's bring him on. And so here we are today doing exactly that, following through on our actions and our words, don't you think?
That's a good thing. To follow through is always important.
It is. So I'm not going to fluff around here as you've been here on the show a few times. So we're going to actually go into the deep end because I want to start off with this first question. Have any of your theories on shadow people, portals, or time travel, have they changed or shifted in the past 2 years due to further research on those topics?
Yeah, no, what's interesting is there has been some research that has come out here lately. It's on the quantum level in the lab, but where they are actually able to, at about a 25% success rate, go back and change a previous decision. So that's really significant. And they're looking at it in like, and I don't necessarily agree with taking this tactic, but the examples they're using are, well, if a gambler, threw some money down and they bet on the wrong horse, the wrong team, or what have you, they could go back and change that decision and basically try again with a 25% success rate. I don't know if that's our best use of that type of technology. It's almost kind of a scary effect when you think of like Back to the Future and Biff Tannen and what he did with the sports book. But yeah, they have been making some progress there on the scientific level.
So then let me ask you this, because obviously you're not agreeing with using it for gambling, and
Right.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. So if you had access to that technology, how would you use it?
Yeah, I wouldn't go back really and change the past. I know a lot of people will look at, there are so many atrocities that happen. And yes, our human history is littered with that. Even our natural history is, when you look at, the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, Mount Vesuvius destroying Pompeii. Those are horrible things that happened, but we would not be here today without those things. As unfortunate as many of them are, I would go back really to watch and observe and really study the past. We have so many debates as to what really happened, and how technology was used. How far back does technology and civilization go? So I would use it as an observation tool.
That's actually a really interesting point. Not only do humans have an interest with the past, that's why we have archaeology, but there's also this theory, as of more recently, that UFOs, extraterrestrials, that's quotation marks, might actually be time travelers. They could either be evolved humans from the future that also want to see what they classify as the past, and that being our present. Do you think that theory has any credibility to it?
There's certainly credibility to it. Where I would kind of draw the line is, there are some of my colleagues that have started to say, well, all ETs and extraterrestrials are just us from the future. And I have to kind of want to try to pull the reins in a little bit. Well, let's not go with all. Some certainly, but you look at the history of our planet. Right now, it's about 4.5 billion years old. We have about another 5 billion before the sun becomes a red giant and destroys the planet. So we're kind of uniquely positioned right in the middle of our planet's history. But our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, the earliest fossils we have for ourselves are about 315,000 years old. We're not we're fairly young. We're not that old at all. You think about the dinosaurs. They went extinct 64 million years ago. Well, that's just over 1% of the entire history of the planet ago. So it's in the grand scheme of the planet, it's not that long, even though it's very, very long to us. So, millions of years from now, humanity might not even be here. We may have destroyed ourselves. We may have had to go colonize somewhere else. We don't know what will happen, but there's a good chance that humans won't be here. But perhaps some other intelligent life form has evolved, developed civilization, and maybe they developed time travel technology and went back in time. And that's what we're seeing. Or even, again, millions of years from now, could be extraterrestrials colonizing on Earth, deciding it's a habitable planet for them. Maybe humans aren't around again. And they, in the course of developing their civilization here on Earth, develop that time travel technology. So it still could be extraterrestrials, but from the distant future. So there's a lot of possibilities at play here.
And those things are so exciting to imagine, to muse about, because, like you said, the possibilities are endless. And especially when we couple it with our current evolution of AI, at some point in time, we're going to just merge with it, as we're seeing with Neuralink, but hopefully doesn't get as bad as the Borg from Star Trek, because
Right.
that's going to be a hot mess. But you know what? If we don't destroy ourselves, AI might do that for us. But looking at that possibility, what's really interesting with AI in these last few months, they have taken exponential strides in understanding patterns more quickly than humans by about 100 to 600% faster. They found one of the scrolls to attempt and find Plato's tomb back near right below Vesuvius, right?
Right.
And so when we're looking at these things, it would be interesting to see if AI will aid the development of time travel. And from your research, you've looked into time travel. It's one of your favorite topics and mine as well. But you look at it from a different perspective in the sense of consciousness. And you actually did a show on it about a month ago dealing with black holes, time travel, and consciousness. And let me tell you, instant brownie points right there, because all those
Thank you.
topics mixed together, chef kiss. It's amazing. But
Thank you.
for those that for those that didn't watch that or know your research on that, can you run us through some interesting findings or theories that you came across?
Yeah. Oh, that opens up a whole can of worms.
It does.
I'm all for, yeah. I mean, I'm all for the development of AI. To a point, we need to be responsible with it. Yeah, we don't want to recreate the Matrix or Terminator or anything crazy like that. There needs to be some sort of responsibility, but we can use it as a tool to help us with so many things on this planet. We've been using AI for decades. I think people kind of tend to forget that. Even our basic household appliance have a small degree of artificial intelligence in there. But when it comes to consciousness, and where the angle that I took this at was, so Nikola Tesla, he actually had, back in the late 1800s, he had ideas and concepts about artificial intelligence. We don't ever think about that, but he actually built what you could really call almost the world's first drone. He called it a teletomaton. It was a little tiny submarine, and his ideas was he had built this for the Spanish-American War. His idea of warfare was, let's get the humans out of it and just have machines fight each other. And so his idea was to have this little submarine that he actually did develop and he demonstrated, uh, that could go out into the waters, make a decision on its particular targets, and choose when exactly to launch a torpedo. That's artificial intelligence. And this is the 1890s that he's developed this. But he took it a step further and said, you know what? I could build a teletomaton of myself that would look like me, act like me, think like me, make decisions just like me. So he's talking about essentially building a robot of himself with artificial intelligence, again, in the 1890s. Now, he was laughed out of the room because of these ideas and concepts that he had. But in today's day and age, we're like, oh, yeah, we've been doing this for a while now. And then, of course, we have our science fiction that shows us all these different ideas of where we might take that technology. But I've always found that really fascinating with him because I believe that he was tapping into what I call eternal knowledge. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. You have the idea of the Akashic records, but essentially it's that eternal knowledge of the universe that's out there. So when we look at different concepts of time and the idea that all time is concurrent, past, present, future, that we're really talking about our existence here in the fourth dimension, and those that are in fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and beyond would be able to access time as an object like we do any three-dimensional object. I believe that he was able to, via his consciousness, tap into that eternal knowledge that's out there. He could already see, he could already envision these concepts of artificial intelligence. He had concepts of like the cell phone and things like this, which made him too far ahead of his time, but he was bringing those concepts back with him into that day and age.
When you think about it like that, either referring it to as the Akashic records or this kind of untapped level of consciousness, it gets a little tricky to talk about it. It's a little bit of taboo just because there is this woo factor to it. Not everyone's going to agree with me, and that's okay. But for a good chunk of people, they're like, I don't really want to go there. I want the science, I want the mathematics. But there are certain people in this world that are just able to tap into this information that again is just way ahead of their time, like Tesla, like
Mhm.
child prodigies, like 10-year-olds that can beat the masters in chess.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
insane.
It kind of is, but it's a part of our world. When we talk about, I love so Dr. Hans Holzer, who's um, he's kind of one of those forefathers of ghost hunting, paranormal investigations, and that sort of thing. But he had a great quote that said, "There is no supernatural world. Everything that exists is natural." So basically, when we have things like child prodigies, when we have things that we would consider woo, it's just things that they exist in our universe. They just don't happen as often. So we kind of chalk it up to all this, supernatural sort of thing. But so let's try to take the woo out of it a little bit. And I know a lot of people try to look at our world as a simulated universe in a computer. And I do believe we are living in some sort of simulation, not necessarily a computer, even though I have a degree in simulation programming. I believe it's something more organic or biological in nature, but we can use concepts of computing and trying to describe it. So if we do that and we look at uh, all of time, the whole universe being here as a whole. So in this sense, like a computer program or even like a computer game, like um, I don't know, your disc for your PlayStation or the cartridge for the Nintendo or whatever, all the information is there, right? The entire game, the entire program is there. When you access it, you're running through it basically more in a linear fashion. Like, with us, we're going through time in a very linear fashion. That's because there's a rule set in place that keeps the flow going. So, like when we talk the river of time, well, time is the water, but the water isn't making itself flow. It's the banks holding the water in place that's keeping the flow going. If you were to remove the banks, then all the water would fall out and just be like a giant stagnant pond or lake or what have you, and it would be all accessible. So the banks in that analogy are really that rule set that's keeping things in order and flowing in a linear fashion. But all of that information is there. The programmers, when they created the program or they created the game or whatever it is, they created the whole thing to be there. And they might, as like the game master or the programmer, they might be able to have access from outside. So outside the simulation, they could access it. So in this sense, with all that information already there, a guy like Tesla, he was basically hacking the program. So he was able to, like, you take the old I don't know, the old Super Mario game when you could find those like secret worlds and things like that. Like, okay, we'll jump above the screen and go to the secret location that you don't normally get to. That's essentially what Tesla was doing. Was he was hacking the program or finding a back door into the system and getting some of that extra knowledge.
That's a really interesting analogy because I think almost everyone has played Mario at least once. And then you
Right.
hear these rumors, especially as a kid, about those kind of more, when you have to like jump up really high and get to those little sky levels
Right.
within the level that you're already in. And so I think that was just a fantastic analogy. But I want to bring it back down a little bit, going from the skies back to the earth here, because you also have an interest and have done significant research in shadow people and the
Mhm.
paranormal entities. And so this is a question that's actually sent to me, and it says, why do some paranormal entities appear as shadows or light from your research?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it has to do with the way that we're talking about the human physiology, the way that our eyes work. We only see into a very narrow band of the entire spectrum. So these particular entities are, um, you know, they have energy. They have a way that they are visible to the light spectrum that really is a bit foreign to us, and we're just getting a glimpse of what they are. So when we talk shadow people, I mean, they can be a number of different things. For one, they could be a human spirit now fully manifesting into our plane of existence. They could be an ET. They could be an extraterrestrial. They could be what we would call an interdimensional being. So, they and many other things too. So it's really several different species using the same energetic modality to enter into our dimension here. And again, we're in the fourth dimension. So especially some of these that are like interdimensional beings, well, they're coming from beyond 5, 6, 7, 8, and so forth. And so when they come into here, well, we don't fully understand. Our body can't register that full geometry. So it's coming off to us in this sort of form. It might be a wispy shadow, could be almost fully formed, like look like a bean. Um, some of these that are ETs, might be some sort of cloaking device that they've instituted that just doesn't fully come off to us. Again, our eyes seen in certain wavelengths. So there's a lot of different ways that we can actually look at that. There's really no one way to answer that question.
But is there any way to decipher or like how you're aware how some show up kind of dark and while
Mhm.
some of them show up more as like balls of light?
Right, and we could even be talking about different things here, or the idea that, well, I mean, one solution here, or one concept, is that humans, we each resonate at a little bit of a different frequency. And testing that was done back in the 90s, they determined that the human standing resonance is anywhere between 9 and 16 hertz. We're all a little bit different. These beings and entities are also resonating at different frequencies. So it's, how well are you able to sync up and actually be able to see and detect this? So I could be standing, and I've been in situations like this before. I could be standing right next to somebody or with a group of people, and we're all looking at the same thing, and it comes off differently. Like one time, there were five of us standing there, and we had all seen this apparition of a little girl morph out of shadow smoke, which was, for one, already bizarre. But trying to coax her a little bit closer, a little bit closer, and she just stayed there in the middle of this hallway and kind of looked at us. But we all saw her a little bit differently. I saw her fully formed from her head down to about her knees, and then she dissipated away. Others saw her fully formed at her feet, and then as it went up, dissipated away at the head. And I believe that had to do with the way that each of us individually resonate, and then what her particular resonance is or was.
Mike, you only gave us the appetizer to that story. I want to hear this whole story about this little girl. Give us the whole meal.
Okay, okay, you want the whole thing. Okay, so this was oh geez, this was like 5 or 6 years ago now. Mineral Springs Hotel, Alton, Illinois. And I had been running some events out there, some little conventions, and having a ghost hunt afterwards. So this was really just winding down. It was at the end of that, it was only five of us left, and we were in the top floor abandoned part of the hotel in a room called Pearl's Room. Unfortunately, there's a confirmed suicide in that room. Pearl, who had passed away back in the 60s, and she is still there to this day. A lot of people go up there and they're able to interact with her. So we were in that room. A couple of guys are there doing an EVP session, and I started hearing something out in the hallway. So I go out in the hallway to take a look, and I'm looking down the hall, and all of a sudden I see this smoke start to billow up and come toward me. And at first you're thinking, is the place on fire? Couldn't smell anything, and but it started doing something really strange and odd too. As it's coming closer and closer, it started creeping up the wall on the right hand side of the hallway, creep back down, creep back up. All the while it's coming closer and closer. And then one of those times it creeped up that wall on the right hand side. That's when it morphed into the apparition of the little girl. And all the others by that point had joined me, and we're all trying to coax her to come closer, come closer. Where she stopped was at this doorway to another room in the hall where there had been reports over the years of the spirit of a little girl being in that room. So there were what we'd call trigger object items in there, like teddy bears and toys and things like that. And we were actually seeing that girl right outside the door, and that's where she had stopped, which was really, really fascinating because I'd never seen her, interacted with her before all the times that I was there investigating. But there she was. And like I said, we all saw her a little bit differently.
Two things that I want to bring up with this story. Number one, referring to seeing it differently. This is really interesting because it's the same thing that goes for a lot of UFO sightings.
Yeah.
When groups of people see it, they see different colors. They even see different shapes with this weird object, this weird anomaly in the sky. And so when we couple that with the paranormal, I think it just continues to blur the line between the UFO phenomenon and the paranormal. There's a lot of similarities between the two. And maybe, just maybe, labels are the things that confuse us. We might be dealing with very similar, if not the same kinds of entities and or anomalies. The second thing that I wanted to bring up here is I haven't come across that many stories of people that have had a paranormal sighting and there was smoke involved. We see it in the movies. It really adds this flair of horror and thriller, but in real life I haven't come across that many. Do you have a possible reason for that?
Um, right place, right time. I mean, I've collected so many stories over the years, and I do have some of those smoke stories. I kind of categorize it under the shadow mist phenomenon. But like the Conjuring house, the house that the first Conjuring movie was based off of in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The movie is very, very different than what happened there, but that's a location where they reported the shadow smoke. The very first television show that I had been on, The Haunted, which is over 12 years ago, that entity there, which turned out to be a red-eyed shadow entity, one of the manifestations one particular evening was of a just large, black, misty, smoky type of shadow, like it didn't fully form up into the being itself. So I have collected several of those over the years. I would say it's not as popular as, say, the full figured shadow person, or what we would call or like the hat wearing entities. Those are a little bit more commonplace, but you do get the smoke too.
You do, but like you said, you only collected a few out of your decades of research. It just is not that many. Now, to bring up the concept of red eyes, this is something that only a handful of entities I think really possess consistently. You have the yellow eyes, you have the red eyes, or you don't really have any. And do you feel like do the red eyes display a certain pattern from your research? Are they more malevolent? Are they benevolent? Is there any kind
Yeah.
of commonalities or differences that you've possibly seen when it comes to entities with red or yellow eyes?
Yeah, it's. I think this is where we as humans try to categorize and compartmentalize things that we are experiencing. So, okay, here's a being with red eyes. We tend to, especially in our horror film culture, we tend to, look at things with red eyes, things that are evil in nature, or yellow might be like yellow gets used a lot for demonic possession films and things like that. And also people reported to me, glowing white eyes, blue eyes, purple eyes. If you could just pick a color. I've probably heard a story about it. Um, so I think yeah, and they don't happen in all of these cases. A lot of times it is just a, you know, dark figure, no eyes, no face, no mouth, nothing. It's just black like that. So that is a good question as to why do some of these have eyes and some don't. And I think we're just dealing with a different species here. When we talk about these different shadows, there's not just one clear cut. This is what a shadow person is, and that's it. We're dealing with a number of different species. So I think there is a species that does have eyes, and they have different colors for those eyes. But I don't think the color necessarily means that because you have red or because you have blue, you're good or bad or anything like that. I mean, you just take humans. You have humans that are good, humans that are bad, and they all have. You might have a good person has brown eyes and a bad person has brown eyes. Doesn't just because they have brown eyes doesn't mean they're one or the other. It's the individual person in the decisions that they make.
I think when you place it like that, it makes a lot of sense. We do really want to see patterns. That's what
Yeah.
humans are all about, is trying to place things in categories. But when you begin to pull that rug under people's feet, they stumble a little bit, and then we begin to understand that maybe, just maybe, we don't always need patterns to understand something, but it does help.
It does help us to try to start going down that path and learning and understanding. But I think it's just scratching the surface there.
And from your research, are there any specific locations on Earth where portal activity or dimensional anomalies seem to be more prevalent, such as the Bermuda Triangle or Skinwalker Ranch? Like, where do you think we might be able to find one?
It's funny; those are the first two places that came to mind.
See, I can read your mind, Mike, just a little bit.
Absolutely, yes, you can. Yeah, places like that, and the reason why uh, those places have that type of activity. We could go Alaska Triangle, Dragon Sea, any of like the real ancient sites of power, Stonehenge, the pyramids. It's because there is more Earth energy at those locations, and there's a reason for that. You have the Earth's core, which is a spinning metallic ball of iron, and it is there is a magnetic force that is emanating out from that, and that becomes our magnetic shield, which helps protect us from the solar wind. We just had those fantastic northern lights, the auroras, a couple of weeks ago. It was amazing, but that was showing that our magnetic shield is working because the solar wind was bouncing off of it into the ionosphere and creating those colors. If we didn't have that magnetic protection, we would have been fried. We would have been a long time ago, actually. But as that magnetism is moving through the Earth, it's interacting with different metals and minerals. And depending on what it interacts with and the quantity of it, it's going to create different types of electromagnetic phenomena. So, you have these different electromagnetic fields here on Earth. So when we talk about the Bermuda Triangle, we talk about Skinwalker Ranch, that's what's going on, is something is there in the ground that our magnetic cores interacting with and creating these strange magnetic fields that are creating this strange phenomena.
Usually, we hear terms or ideas of there being a rip in the veil, but talking about the Earth's core and using Earth energy, I think is rather interesting. Do you think in that case, with the Earth's core, it might have what could be classified as exotic matter in order to create portals or dimensional anomalies?
Yeah, whatever might be there in the ground, and certainly places like Skinwalker, there's something significant that's there that, I mean, yes, it's helping to create these rips in the veil that it's creating different magnetic or electric frequencies that are basically able to give us, it might be a time slip, it might be a view into another dimension, it might be a portal that opens up that somebody disappears through, and maybe they go to another dimension, maybe they go to another point in time. And while they're reluctant to admit it here on Earth, uh, science, sure, The science backs up. We have electromagnetic grid across the Earth, but they're reluctant to say they're opening portals here on Earth. But like NASA will say, out in space, we do have portals, and basically where that um, magnetic shield interacts with the solar wind up there, there are portals. They call them X points that are opening and closing, and they've actually sent up satellites to study this. They have not yet really found a pattern. They kind of open and close randomly and at different sizes, but when they do open, they allow that solar wind to come in a little bit more quickly, and they smack a little harder against the ionosphere. So science has admitted, yes, we do have portals, even though they're reluctant here to say, yeah, Stonehenge has a portal or something like that. But it does happen. The science really does back it up.
Could you imagine if NASA said, "Yep, there's portals here on Earth. It's right at Stonehenge." Imagine the flock of people
Oh,
that would
geez.
go,
Yeah.
and it would just be chaotic across the board. In any way that you could think it'd be chaotic, it would be in that exact form. But to continue with that thought, have you come across any stories or cases dealing with portals and missing people?
Yeah, a number of them. David Paulides has done a lot of work in this missing 411, but the Alaska Triangle, there's so many missing person cases up there. It's just absolutely bizarre. The number of missing airplanes, and many of these cases are suspected to, not all of them. I mean, people go missing out in the woods, get eaten by a bear, or there are kidnappings. So obviously not all of them, but many of them, because there are so many, it's just uncanny. So many of them are believed to be, somebody stepped through a portal out in the woods because all of a sudden, they turned around and they were gone. Where did they go? That sort of thing. And people that get found say, I don't know what happened because I was on the path, maybe there with a friend, heard a noise out in the woods, took 2 steps off the path to take a look, couldn't find what the noise was, turned around and get back on the path, and the path was gone. So did they step into something? They step up across that veil? Did they step into a portal, some sort of wormhole? It's quite possible. Some of these missing airplanes. And so with the Alaska Triangle television show, we covered several of these, but one of them was a large Douglas Skymaster plane from 1950. And where this went missing, it was in January, but it was a nice day. And it was just over the Canadian border and around a place called Snag. It just completely lost contact, never heard from it again. Massive search and rescue mission, largest one up to that date, both joint US and Canada. They were actually doing some military exercises together at the time. So they got off the exercises and they went looking for this plane. Nothing. And yet, just a couple of weeks later, there was a smaller plane that actually went down in that area, that same area where they had last heard from the Douglas Skymaster. They were to find that immediately. Not a problem, a smaller one. So that's really bizarre. And then before and after the Skymaster went missing, there were UFO sightings on both sides of it, just before and just after. So one of the ideas is that it passed through some sort of portal into another dimension, or I throw out there, maybe another point in time. And if it did go back to another point in time, let's say it went back, just use an arbitrary number, 500 years ago. Well, what would an airplane, if it popped into existence 500 years ago, what would an airplane look like to the indigenous people of the area at that time? They would have no concept whatsoever of an airplane. To them, it would be some massive bird in the sky, very loud, very thunderous in nature. So is this where we're getting some of our Thunderbird legends from? So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at these.
I think that's a really cool analogy to consider if these planes did go through a portal and then coupling it with the idea of Thunderbirds. I can dig that. But there obviously when we're dealing with time travel, there's a lot of issues with it according to just like basic theories in science in the sense of if you enter through a portal or if you have a time traveling machine and you go into any point in time, are you going on a different timeline? Are you going on the same timeline? How? Because then you have the butterfly effect. You can have the grandfather
Mhm.
paradox. You have all of these issues going on. It doesn't mean that they're maybe 100% true as their only theory, but I think there are certain things to consider. So if that is the case, bear with me here, Mike. I think this is going to be really interesting.
Go for it,
Bear
Christina.
with me. Okay. Because then what if you have these interdimensional beings that are sharing these stories of the Thunderbird? They share it to this timeline, and that's how we get these stories. Is that crazy to think like that, or do you think it could be possible?
I don't think it's crazy to think of. I know a lot of people have, especially with our science fiction these days, a lot of people have really taken that idea of a multiverse to heart. That there are a lot of different timelines that are out there that are getting created. I do have a little bit of a hard time with that. The idea that just because I picked up my coffee mug now, I spawned off another universe, because that was a decision I made. I have a little bit of a hard time with that. And then people try to put rules on it. Well, it's major decisions. Well, okay, so I could make a decision to cross the street, which isn't a major decision for me, but somebody making a turn onto that street, maybe they have to hit the brakes, for me to pass. And then further down the road, they either get into an accident or don't get into an accident that they would have previously done so, just because of stopping for me to cross the street. So it turns out to be a major decision for them. And so trying to play with those rules is a little sketchy. Um, where I find this coming into play, I believe generally there's one timeline that can be changed, and we do see effects of that playing out when there are changes made, when people do go back in time, or somebody experiences a time slip and they're able to actually interact with the past for a short period of time. I believe we do have those ripple effects. And when we talk about the something like the Mandela effect, I believe that is the result of time travelers that haven't. And I don't believe they're going back, because a lot of the Mandela effect stuff that you find online is like changing in branding, like Fruit Loops or Fruit of the Loom, or all these different things like that, Oscar Mayer. And nobody's going back in time to change branding. That's just too trivial. But I believe people are going back in time, and it might just be what I was talking about earlier, to watch and observe. And because of little things like, okay, your observer is walking across the street, and somebody else that's actually there within that time has to make a different decision based on that, you start to have that butterfly effect ripple forth. And so we in the present, we we start to feel that at some point, and there are moments where we start to question our reality, because it's like, this that doesn't seem right. I remember this differently. And you start to find other people across the world that also remember it differently. And it's not always these big things, obvious things like the branding. There are some smaller things as well that people kind of connect on, like, I remember this being different. And so I think that is the result of some of these time travel paradoxes playing themselves out.
For me, one of the really shocking things that kind of got me into the Mandela effect was Jane Goodall. I thought she had passed away in the late 80s or in the
Mhm.
90s. And then I found out that she was still alive. And I said, that's not how I remembered it in school. That is not what
Right.
happened. She had passed away decades ago. And so that really messed me up. It did. I was like, am I wrong? Is she wrong? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's
But
it's interesting, because there was, in the 1980s, there was a Russian physicist. I can't pronounce his whole name, but his last name was Novikov, and he came up with this uh, self-consistency principle, basically saying that while mathematically time travel is possible, you couldn't actually change anything, because the math basically wouldn't resolve itself out properly. So then you had two other renowned physicists of the time, Kip Thorne and Joe Polchinski. People may recognize Kip Thorne from having worked with Christopher Nolan on the movie Interstellar. So the two of them start having a discussion, some back and forth correspondence about this. And so Polchinski comes up with this idea of taking a billiard ball and shooting it through a Einstein-Rosen bridge. And since that's based on Einstein's theory of relativity, we can actually use this in a scientific example. So you shoot this billiard ball through the wormhole, but you have the exit point of the billiard ball situated at a certain point in a direct angle to actually knock the billiard ball off course before it actually gets to the wormhole to begin with. Thus, how can it knock itself off course like that if it didn't enter into the wormhole to begin with? So you have a paradox, and this is totally acceptable. They're on board with this. Okay, we just created some sort of time travel paradox here. And I kind of, when I first came across that some years back, I was laughing at it because when it comes to science fiction storylines, we talk about the grandfather paradox, and science basically was kind of shooed that off to the side, saying, "Well, that's for science fiction story writers. Those are for time travel storylines. It's just for film and books and things like that." But yet, you look at the Polchinski paradox, which scientists are on board with. Our theoretical physicists say, "Okay, that one makes sense." Is essentially the same thing as a grandfather paradox. But because it's a billiard ball and a wormhole, it's okay. But it's not okay when we're talking about a time machine and dead grandfathers.
The logic is not there. It's
Right.
not. But to be fair, people in general are not very rational. They can believe one thing and not the other, even though we're looking at the same thing or very similar things. And that leads me into my next question, where you're casually walking down the street and you find someone that looks exactly like you,
Mm.
known as the doppelganger effect. And so, have you come across any examples where people have seen maybe even like a younger version of themselves
Mhm.
in the same location, maybe at different times? Maybe we're dealing a little bit with the Mandela effect. We could be dealing with time travel here. What what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in my research, I believe most of these, not all, but it's never all. That's the thing; it's never all,
Never.
because there are a lot of different reasons for these things happening in our world. But I believe most of them are actually time slips. Doppelganger is just a German word that means double walker, and there are a lot of legends and lore about spirits trying to mimic people or they're evil twins and these sorts of things. And I think that's because centuries ago, when people would witness these sorts of things, people fear what they don't understand. Of course, very religious era, so it must be evil. If it's not from God, it must be evil. That sort of thing was going on back at that time. But when you look at some of these stories, you have to start scratching your head and saying, I think it's something different. And one of my favorite stories to tell about this is the famous poet, German poet Goethe. So he was around late 1700s, early 1800s, and in one of his works, Dichtung und Wahrheit, or in English, Poetry and Truth, he recounts this personal experience that he had where one day he's walking down the road toward the town of Drissenheim. He's having an affair with a young woman there, and he's just lost in his thoughts. And all of a sudden, as he's walking down this road, he notices this other gentleman walking in the opposite direction on the other side of the road. And he's wearing this gold trimmed gray suit. Catches his eye, so he turns to get a better look at the guy, and all of a sudden, poof, guy disappears. He's gone. And Guts is like, whoa, what the heck happened there? Where'd that guy go? I was just looking right at him, and he just disappeared. Well, he can't do anything about it. The guy's gone. So he notes it and continues on his way toward Drissenheim. Well, years later, he's walking on that same road again in the opposite direction. And he's about to come up onto that spot where that incident happened. He starts to recall the incident. And all of a sudden, he realizes, wait a minute. I was the guy in the gold trim gray suit. I'm actually wearing the thing right now. I actually saw myself. So to me, it's a time slip incident where he had a couple of years beforehand seen himself walking the opposite direction in that suit. So it wasn't really a doppelganger. It wasn't somebody trying to mimic him or evil twin or anything like that. It was just himself at two different points in time. But then we have to ask ourselves, okay, what was the catalyst for this? What made this happen? And I think we have to go back to the very beginning of the story when he was talking about being lost in his thoughts. It's a type of meditative state. And we kind of do this all the time, where we'll zone out while we're driving, we'll miss our turn, miss our exit. Oh darn, I got to turn around and go back. It's not a full meditative state, because if you're full meditative state while you're driving, you probably get in a car accident. But it is a type of slight meditative state. And we do this while doing other things like mowing the lawn or doing the dishes or whatever. So he's in this slight meditative state while he was walking. And I believe what he was able to do was he was able to tune into his own energy, his own frequency there at another point in time along that road. He was able to sync up with it for just a moment, got a glimpse of it. And then once he fully diverted his attention to it, it snapped him out of that meditative state and broke the synchronization. And that's why he lost the glimpse of it. But yeah, I think when it comes to more of like these time slip, time travel incidents, when it comes to these, we call the doppelganger effect, it has more to do with consciousness, personal energy, and resonance.
It's the same kind of thing of when people mention their shadow people stories, they usually see
Mhm.
it from the side of their eye. But when they look at it, it's no like when they look at it at full view, it's no longer there. This is
Right.
something a very similar story to that.
Right, in a sense. And there's another piece to throw into the mix there with the shadows out of the periphery, and that's because our eyes are made up of rods and cones, and the rods from the sides, they're more grouped around the sides of cones and more towards the front. The rods were meant to take in more light, so we actually take in more light from the periphery. We actually see a touch into the infrared over there as well, and so that's why we might see something out of the corner of our eye. We turn and look, and it seems like it's gone. It's probably not gone though. But there is an interesting story that I have, and I include both of these stories within my book, and
Which
that
book?
is
Plug it.
Travels Through Time. So Travels Through Time. That's a time travel book. Um, so story that was related to me a few years ago. There's a young man, when he was a child, he had walked into the kitchen one day, and there was this tall, dark, hooded figure standing over by the kitchen table. Scared him to death. Boom. He ran out of the room. So it became like the hooded shadow person story of the household for a number of years. Well, he grows up as a young man, and he's at the kitchen table one day making himself a sandwich. He's wearing a hoodie. And all of a sudden, he sees coming into the kitchen doorway this really short shadow figure that stops and then, boom, darts right back out of the kitchen. And it hits him. Oh my God, that was me when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I saw myself older over here by the kitchen table. So it wasn't really a shadow person all along. It was just himself at two different points in time. But it only came off. And here's, of course, the question is, okay, why is a shadow? Why not like Goethe, where he actually saw himself as a gentleman? And again, I think it comes down to frequency, energy, resonance, vibration. And I liken it to like old school radio dial. Like in the car these days, sure, we still have the dials, but you kind of click, 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 click through the stations. Well, back in the day, you didn't have that. You kind of had to fine tune the band as it went across, with the dial. And so you could get it perfectly tuned, but if you're a little bit before, a little bit after, it would come in kind of staticky. And I think that's what was happening in this case, where he had tuned into his own energy, but not fully. He wasn't quite there yet. And so instead of coming off as like a full apparition of himself, it came off as a shadow instead.
Mike, can I say that you are killing it with the analogies today? Like you're making it so easy to follow.
Thank you. Well, and I do that on purpose because I think people relate more to stories. Sure, I could throw out a bunch of facts and figures at you that probably just go right over your head and be like, "Huh? What did we just talk about?" And it's not going to make sense. I think people relate to stories, so it's like, okay, let's take these ideas and concepts. We'll give some examples. We'll talk about some stories. It's kind of like when I was in school. You had you say, okay, history class in school, and people are like, oh, names, dates, wars, people who died, that sort of thing. They're bored to tears. But I was actually very fortunate to have a couple of very, very good history teachers. And the way that they were able to get us to actually learn was they would get up there and just tell the stories. Like I had a world history teacher that had actually traveled the world. So he would talk about these different locations and the history behind it while also telling us these funny stories about what happened to he and his family while they were out there. And so when it got to the test time, it's like, oh yeah, this is when they were, walking down the street at, in Amsterdam and this silly thing happened or whatever, Yeah. So it's story is how people can relate.
Adding that human element, it does make it a lot easier. People are able to connect with it because, yes, facts are great. We all want them, but we're not able to retain it at the same rate compared to a story.
Right.
And speaking of which, a few weeks ago, we had this incredible eclipse,
Mhm.
and you looked into some rather interesting stories referring to weird things happening during eclipses. So, can you share any of these bizarre cases, either with the paranormal or with UFOs, that manifest during that same time?
Yeah, that video that I had shared, I'll be honest, Christina, some of those stories are going to escape me because the video that I shared was from the 2017 eclipse. I put together a nice video of different legends and lore from indigenous tribes and other cultures from across the world. But what's interesting is cultures from across the world have tried to make sense of this phenomena for millennia. They know something special is happening. They know that the energy changes. So there might be a coyote story with our culture, the indigenous tribes here in America. The Chinese had their own different beliefs as well. Ancient Egyptians and so forth. They would put some sort of legend and lore behind, okay, we're seeing this thing, but we know the energy is very, very different here and special things are happening. And so we can learn a lot from those different stories from those other cultures.
What kind of special things happen during an eclipse?
Well, for one, we're blocked from the sun. We're blocked from the sun's energy during that moment, and all of a sudden, the moon is right in the way of everything. So it creates. Okay, we're talking before earlier about how the Earth's uh, mag- uh, magnetosphere is protecting us from the rays of the sun during that time. Well, there's no sun during a time where there usually is the sun. So what is really fascinating to watch during that time is what goes on with the animals. They can sense and feel things better than we. And all of a sudden, it gets very, very quiet. The animals have disappeared. They know something strange is going on. So when we talk about like moments where you have that thinning of the veil, or a moment in which you could maybe better open up a portal or something like that, these are those moments where that can happen.
I don't have words for that one. I think that is really darn cool. Just imagine the amount of portals opening during the eclipse and no one would notice because they're all staring up in the
They're all
sky.
staring up, right? Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. That's oh. Now I'm gonna wait for the next eclipse and start looking for portals everywhere, running around, bringing my tennis shoes, and just go, go, go. That'd
Yeah,
be
if
awesome.
you can find a place where it's 100% totality, which living here in the Cleveland, Ohio area, we had that. That was truly amazing. Once in a lifetime. Yeah, and like I said, just the way it got so quiet and just still. It was there. You couldn't hear birds. You know, nothing. It was amazing. Plus, okay, you got the eclipse going on up there. If you lowered your eyes for just a moment, you had a 360-degree sunset on top of it, which was wild.
Oh my goodness. Now, while birds may not be chirping during an eclipse, a little birdie did tell me that you're working on a new book. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I've actually shifted gears here. So my next book was going to be specifically on Earth energy. Travels Through Time is the first in the Connecting the Universe series that I've started. So I'd figured, okay, we're going to progress from inner workings of time and the universe and the cosmos, and we'll get into Earth energy and kind of build up from there. But when I was just recently out in Egypt, Stargates of Ancient Egypt tour, our second one, I just became inspired to just kind of forego. I'll get back to it. Forego the Earth Energy book and get into my Stargates book. So it's Portals to the Stars, uh, Stargates, Atlantis, and Secrets of Ancient Egypt. So it'll be more than just Stargates, but it will get into a lot of that. Portal technology, Stargates will get into the ideas of Atlantis and what happened there as well, and some of these more hidden things that are there in ancient Egypt.
When will it be released? Give me a ballpark answer.
Ballpark would be holidays this year. I have to really get moving on it because I had been working on the other book and now I'm just inspired to write this other one. So it's like, I really need to just kind of lock myself in a room somewhere and get to it. But it's possible I could have it out for the holidays.
That's going to be a great Christmas gift.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say it. I'm going to put it out there. It's going to be super cool because the concept of portals and stargates, I mean,
Mhm.
it just captures anyone's brain, their mind, their imagination. Mike,
Right.
we have a few minutes left. I want to do a speed round with you, asking
Okay.
you fun questions. Like these have all been fun questions, but fun, silly questions. All right, you
Okay.
ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Oh, historical.
Or
Um,
celebrity?
yeah,
Well,
probably. You know what? Since I've kind of been on that kick lately, Oppenheimer.
ooh, okay. What would you ask him on your dinner date?
Yeah. No, I'm really fascinated as to where his mind went in the quantum world. Relating to ideas, of course, time travel and how the universe is constructed. What his ideas on that work, and really, any of those guys, Einstein, Bohm, Niels Bohr, any of those guys. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you could solve any unsolved mystery, which one would you choose? Only one.
Only one. I don't know. Black Dahlia is a good one. I think it's kind of been
Oh,
almost like a pop culture thing these days. So it's like, let's figure her out.
yeah. And for those that aren't familiar with that mystery, can you briefly tell us about it?
Yeah, Elizabeth Smart. It was a pretty gruesome murder in the LA area, late 1940s. But having run around in the paranormal circles for so many years, there's so much, I don't know, legend and lore that's come up about her lately. So it's like, yeah, okay. I don't know. That was just first one that popped in my head, but there are several.
What do you think is the most important piece of advice for aspiring paranormal researchers?
Um, I usually tell people, to get with a seasoned group that's been doing this for many, many years and just learn from them. Don't just go based off of what you see on the television shows. Uh, you'll pick up some bad habits from there. And I've been on several of the television shows, but you just kind of get a real basic general overview, and so much is hyped up on the television show. So get with a seasoned group that knows what they're doing, has a good reputation, and learn.
All right. And my last question for you is, do you prefer the ocean or the mountains as you are a seasoned traveler, traveling the world all the time? Or would you go?
Uh the mountains. I appreciate a nice walk on the beach in the warm weather, but just I can't, I'm not one of those that just lays out on the beach. I want to explore, and so I think there's a bit more to explore in the mountains than on the beach.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. Where can people find you online to stay up to date with your work and the release of your new book?
Yeah, you can find me MikeRicksecker.com. It's my primary website. You can find all my books and everything out there. I also have my community and membership site, connecteduniverseportal.com. And yeah, you can find my event schedule at either one of those, sign up for the newsletter, all that wonderful stuff.
And those links will be in the description box below. If you enjoy the strange and the mysterious, UFOs, the paranormal, and cryptids, this channel is for you. So make sure to subscribe as I do 3 videos right here every single week. and hit that notification bell so you do not miss any of the bonus content I post right here.